Chapter 1. Shadows Born. The darkness of the warren was absolute, a suffocating cloak of shadow that smelled of damp stone and decay. My claws scratched the cold floor as I crept through the twisting tunnels, guided only by the faint whispers of other Skaven somewhere in the distance. It was not fear that made me silent. It was discipline, beaten into my bones through years of relentless training. Clan Eshin demanded perfection, and I had no desire to meet the fate of those who failed to meet its standards. I paused at a junction, pressing my ear to the rough wall. The faint scuttle of claws and the hiss of a blade slicing the air reached my ears. Another failure, another hopeful aspirant cut down in practice. That was the way of things here: survive, adapt, or die. The weak served no purpose to the clan. The dojo, if you could call the grim pit a dojo, was nestled deep in the Under Empire, hidden even from most of our kind. We called it the Shadow Warrens, though many whispered of its true name, the Pit of Knives. From the moment I was dragged here, a scrawny runt barely old enough to sharpen my claws, I was told there were only two ways out: success or death. The masters saw to it. Strike faster, yes, yes. Kill clean, no hesitation. The harsh voice of a master echoed down the tunnels as I slipped into the training hall. The sound of blades clashing filled the air, as did the sharp scent of blood. Aspirants, younger than me by at least a season, faced off against one another in brutal mock duels. Their fur was matted with grime, and their eyes darted in fear. I had once been one of them. Now, at the ripe age of 4 seasons, I was considered a veteran aspirant, though that title was no comfort. Those who lasted as long as I had were fewer than the claws on my paw. "Krix, here now," barked one of the masters, a scarred and hunched figure named Skral. His eyes glinted with malice as I approached. Skral had been my teacher since my first day, a harsh but cunning instructor. He was missing his left ear, but his remaining one twitched constantly, as if it could hear every secret in the shadows. I approached with care, bowing slightly as I had been taught. "Yes, master?" Skral's whiskers twitched in satisfaction, though his voice betrayed no kindness. "You are chosen, Krix. Yes, yes. The council sees potential in you. The trial of shadows is yours." The trial of shadows. My heart quickened, though I kept my face blank. Every aspirant dreamed of hearing those words, yet they were laced with dread. The trial was the final test, the razor's edge between life and death. Success meant elevation to a true assassin of Clan Eshin, a shadow blade. Failure meant, well, failure wasn't tolerated. "I am honored, master," I said, keeping my tone low and submissive. Inside, my mind raced. My time had come. "Do not be so quick, proud fool rat," Skral sneered. "You will not survive, no, no. The trial is death for many much. The shadows will hunt you, yes, yes, and you will fall bleed. But maybe you will surprise me." His words were not meant to encourage, and yet they lit a fire in me. I had survived this long. I had outwitted and outlasted countless rivals. I would not fall now. "You leave at dawn dark," Skral continued, thrusting a small, blackened dagger into my paw. Its edge was jagged, and the hilt was wrapped in old leather. "Your blade, your only friend. Use it well, or die stupid." I nodded, clutching the blade tightly. My claws ached from the years of practice, but I knew this was only the beginning. The trial would test more than my skill with the weapon. It would test my cunning, my instincts, my will to survive. As I turned to leave, Skral's voice stopped me. "One thing more, Krix. Do not trust anyone. Even the shadows lie. Yes, yes." I glanced back, meeting his cold gaze. "Understood, master." As I walked away, the reality of my situation settled over me like a shroud. The trial of shadows was not just a test, it was a hunt. I would be pursued through the endless tunnels of the Under Empire by seasoned assassins who lived to spill blood in the name of the clan. If I survived, I would be one of them. If I failed, my carcass would be left to rot in the darkness. I returned to my corner of the warren, where I sat sharpening my blade by the faint glow of warpstone lamps. The other aspirants avoided my gaze, their whispers hissing through the air like a chorus of rats. "Krix will fail, die. 2 weeks slow." "No, no. Krix clever might survive. Yes, yes." foolish to think. I ignored them. Let them talk. They would see soon enough. In the trial, there would be no friends, no rivals, only predators and prey. And I intended to be the predator. As the hours crept by and the dim light faded, I allowed myself one final moment of reflection. The path of the assassin was not one I had chosen. It had been forced upon me by the cruelty of the Under Empire. Yet now it was my only path. My claws tightened around the hilt of the blade. I would not fail. The shadows would be mine to command. Chapter 2. The Warrant of Death. The cold bite of iron pressed against my flesh as I knelt in the center of the ceremonial chamber. My fur bristled in anticipation as the acrid scent of warpstone-laced incense filled the air, mingling with the low hissing whispers of the watching council. My heart pounded, each beat a drum heralding the beginning of my trial. Above me, a towering Skaven with a twisted grin held the branding iron, its glowing tip shaped like the sigil of Clan Eshin. This was the mark of the trial, a symbol etched into every aspirant chosen to endure the trial of shadows. To the survivors, it was a badge of honor. To the dead, it was just another scar burned into a forgotten corpse. Marked, yes, yes, rasped Skral, standing nearby with a glint of amusement in his beady eyes. Krix, the shadow watches, the shadow judges. Your trial begins now. I clenched my jaw as the brand seared into my flesh, a burning pain that spread through my shoulder like wildfire. I didn't scream, though the urge clawed at me. Weakness was not an option. Not here. When the iron was pulled away, leaving a smoking sigil on my shoulder, I felt a twisted mix of pride and dread. The mark was proof I had been chosen, but it was also a beacon. It would guide my hunters, the shadows, straight to me. The council chamber was silent save for the scuttling of unseen vermin in the shadows. A ring of masked figures loomed above, their eyes gleaming from the darkness. These were the Council of Masters, the true architects of the trial. Their voices were sharp whispers, yet they cut through the silence like blades. The trial of shadows begins in the dark. Yes, yes, one of the masters hissed. Aspirant Krix has 1 hour to flee run, then the shadows come. 3 hunters, deadly killers, will seek hunt you. Another voice chimed in, high-pitched and dripping with malice. To survive, live, you must reach the sanctuary, far, far in the warrens. Do not be seen caught. I dared not look up. I had heard whispers of the shadows, the clan's most elite assassins, chosen to test aspirants in their trials. Each was a master of their craft, deadly, cunning, and merciless. Failure to evade them meant death or worse, capture and humiliation. The shadows, the master continued, are named Silent Bite, Black Whisker, and Ghost Fang. Each has sworn to spill blood this night. Beware care. I knew of them, of course. Silent Bite was a brutal close-quarters killer, wielding twin daggers with such speed that victims often died before they realized they were attacked. Black Whisker was a master tracker, rumored to use alchemical scents and poisons to trace prey through the labyrinthine tunnels. Ghost Fang was the most feared, an expert in psychological warfare, able to manipulate the shadows themselves to drive prey into traps. Remember, no, Skral hissed, his voice sharp like a blade. The warrens are your enemy, yes, yes, but also your ally. The shadows hide, conceal, but they also deceive, betray. Trust only your cunning. They led me to the edge of the trial grounds, a sprawling network of tunnels known as the Hollow Veins. The map they provided was a mockery, little more than faded sketches with glaring gaps where paths abruptly ended or twisted into dead ends. The air here was stale, thick with the scent of old blood and stagnant water. A gong sounded in the distance, echoing through the tunnels like the death knell it was. My head start had begun. For a moment, I stood frozen, my paws gripping the hilt of the dagger Skral had given me the night before. The blade felt pitifully small in the face of what lay ahead. Then I ran. The tunnels were a maze of twisting paths and endless forks, each turn a gamble. I forced myself to move quickly but carefully, my ears straining to catch any sound. My mind raced with possibilities. I needed to think like the shadows, anticipate their moves before they made them. Silent Bite would attack swiftly, so I had to keep moving, never staying in one place long enough for him to close the distance. Black Whisker would sniff me out, so I needed to find ways to mask my scent. Ghost Fang was the one I feared most. His reputation for psychological games meant I couldn't trust my own instincts completely. The light was dim, the warpstone lamps flickering weakly. I made my way through a narrow passage, the walls pressing close on either side. The floor was slick with moisture, and the air felt suffocatingly thick. It was easy to imagine the shadows watching from the darkness, waiting for the moment to strike. After what felt like an eternity, the gong rang again. My hour was up. Somewhere in the darkness they stirred. The shadows were coming. I could almost feel their presence, a weight pressing on the back of my neck. My breathing quickened, but I forced myself to stay calm. Panic would get me killed faster than a blade. As I crept deeper into the warrens, I began to lay traps of my own. Nothing sophisticated, loose rocks balanced precariously above a path. A snare made from frayed rope scavenged from the ground. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make them think twice, or so I hoped. The shadows around me seemed to deepen, the flickering light playing tricks on my eyes. Every sound felt amplified, the drip of water, the scuttle of claws, the faint rustle of air. Was it my imagination, or were they already here? I paused at a junction, my mind racing with possibilities. Left led to a series of narrow tunnels where I could potentially lose a pursuer. Right led to the deeper chambers where the air was thick with gas but offered more places to hide. I hesitated for only a moment before taking the left path. Behind me, faintly, I thought I heard the soft pad of footsteps. The hunt had begun. I tightened my grip on my dagger and moved deeper into the darkness, every sense on high alert. I wasn't just running for survival now, I was running to prove that I belonged in the shadows, that I could master them. The trial of shadows had begun, and I would not fail. Chapter 3. Into the Depths. The air grew colder as I descended, the dim flicker of warpstone lamps barely enough to light the jagged path ahead. The hollow veins were a labyrinth, and every step felt like it could be my last. The wall seemed to close in around me, slick with moisture and streaked with faint traces of warpstone glow. This place reeked of death, old blood, and the stale scent of Skaven who had failed before me. I paused at a fork in the path, my claws digging into the cold stone as I scanned my options. To the left, a narrow passage twisted sharply into darkness. To the right, a wider tunnel sloped downward, the faint sound of dripping water echoing through it. My instincts screamed that neither path was safe, but I had no choice. I took the left, favoring the cover of the narrower route. The shadows would be following by now, their pace patient and deliberate. They didn't need to hurry. They knew I'd make a mistake eventually. The ground shifted beneath me as I stepped forward. A trap, old and rudimentary but effective. The stone gave way, and I stumbled back just as a series of rusted spikes shot upward from a hidden pit. They were crude, more likely to cause infection than instant death, but the message was clear. This was not just a test of skill. It was a reminder that the warrens themselves were my enemy. I cursed under my breath and carefully edged around the trap. The pit yawned below, dark and endless. It was one of many reminders of the countless others who had walked this path before me and failed. Bones littered the bottom, brittle and crumbling. The remains of those who had underestimated the trial or overestimated their own abilities. I would not join them. As I moved deeper into the tunnels, my thoughts began to wander unbidden. Why had I chosen this path? The question had no easy answer, though the truth gnawed at the back of my mind. Like all Skaven, I was born into the squalor and treachery of the Under Empire, my life worth less than the scraps I fought to eat. Weakness was a death sentence. It always had been. Clan Eshin had offered me something more. A chance to rise above the filth, to become more than just another nameless rat in the warren. Of course, their offer was no act of mercy. They didn't want me to thrive. They wanted me to survive. Barely. I was a tool to them, one among many, sharpened and honed until I either broke or became useful. And yet, I had chosen this. My claws tightened around the hilt of my dagger. I wasn't deluded enough to believe in glory or honor. No Skaven ever rose without stepping on the backs of others. But I wanted more than survival. I wanted to prove that I could master the shadows, bend them to my will. If I could pass this trial, I would be feared, respected even. No longer prey but predator. The terrain grew more treacherous as I continued. The walls closed in until I was forced to crouch, my whiskers brushing against the damp stone. My fur bristled with unease as the tunnel opened into a cavernous chamber. Stalactites hung from the ceiling, dripping water into shallow pools that glimmered faintly in the dim light. I hesitated, scanning the area for any sign of movement. Then I saw it, a faint disturbance in the dirt near one of the pools. A tripwire, barely visible, stretched taut across the ground. My heart pounded as I crouched, following its line to a crude mechanism hidden in the shadows. Blades, jagged and rusted, were rigged to swing down at the slightest touch. Someone had set this trap recently. Perhaps it was one of the shadows, or maybe another aspirant who had come before me, trying to outwit their hunters. Either way, it was a grim reminder of the danger I faced. The shadows wouldn't just pursue me. They would use every trick, every trap, every shadow to end me. I carefully stepped over the tripwire, my breathing shallow as I continued forward. The cavern narrowed again, and I pressed on, every muscle in my body taut with tension. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint scuttling of unseen vermin in the distance. My senses strained, searching for any hint of danger. As I moved, memories of my earliest days in Clan Eshin resurfaced. The grueling training, the endless drills, the nights spent shivering in the dark as the masters whispered threats and promises in equal measure. I had been a runt, smaller and weaker than the others, but I had survived. Not because I was the strongest or the fastest, but because I learned. I watched. I adapted. Now, that same cunning was all that stood between me and death. The shadows were out there hunting me, and I had to think like them if I wanted to survive. Silent Bite would already be on the move, using the terrain to his advantage. Black Whisker would be following my scent, analyzing every step I took. And Ghost Fang was the one I feared most. His reputation for psychological warfare was legendary. He wouldn't just kill me. He would make me break first. A faint sound, barely more than a whisper, caught my attention. My ears twitched, and I froze, my dagger held ready. The shadows around me seemed to deepen, the flickering light playing tricks on my eyes. Was it just my imagination, or were they already here? I tightened my grip on the blade and forced myself to move. There was no time for hesitation. The hollow veins were vast, and I needed to stay ahead. The path sloped downward again, leading deeper into the labyrinth. My claws scraped against the stone as I descended, the oppressive weight of the shadows pressing down on me. I didn't know what awaited me in the depths, but I couldn't turn back. The trial wasn't just a test of my skill or my strength. It was a test of my will. The masters wanted to see if I could survive the darkness, not just the physical darkness of the tunnels, but the darkness within myself. I would prove them right, or I would die trying. Chapter 4. The hunters begin. The shadows around me were alive. I was sure of it. Every drip of water, every scuttle of claws, seemed louder than it should have been. I could feel them. They were coming. The shadows, deadly assassins of Clan Eshin, masters of death and deception. They wouldn't strike yet. That wasn't their way. No, they would wait, watch, and strike when I was weakest. Somewhere behind me, they gathered. I could almost imagine them there, in the darkness, their whispers like venomous hisses. 3 hunters, each with their own methods, their own reputations. Silent Bite, Black Whisker, and Ghost Fang. They weren't just predators, they were legends. Silent Bite crouched low, sharpening his twin daggers with a small stone. His movements were precise, methodical, and almost meditative. His fur was pitch black, a perfect match for the void of the tunnels. He didn't speak much, he didn't need to. His actions spoke for him, and they always ended in blood. Fast, quick, no hesitation, he muttered, his voice a low rasp as he ran a claw along the edge of a blade. This Krix rat is nothing. A small prey. Quick, easy kill. Despite his quiet demeanor, Silent Bite was known for his arrogance. He thrived on the thrill of the hunt, on the knowledge that his speed and precision outmatched any foe. To him, I was just another target, another challenge to add to his growing list of conquests. Black Whisker. Black Whisker, on the other hand, was more vocal. He paced back and forth, his tail flicking with agitation. His fur was a mottled gray, streaked with patches of lighter color that made him nearly invisible in the tunnels. A pouch of alchemical tools hung from his waist, clinking softly as he moved. "This one smells fierce already," Black Whisker sneered, lifting his snout to sniff the air. "The trail is fresh. I will track him. No escape, no hiding from me." Black Whisker's reputation was built on his unmatched tracking skills. He was a predator in every sense of the word, using his nose and his cunning to pursue his prey with relentless determination. To him, the hunt was a puzzle, and he loved nothing more than piecing it together. Ghost Fang. And then there was Ghost Fang. He stood apart from the others, leaning against the cold stone wall with a calm that was more unsettling than any threat. His eyes, pale and almost luminescent, gleamed in the dim light. His fur was a silvery white, an unnatural shade for a Skaven, yet it suited his reputation. "This one will break crumble," Ghost Fang said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. "They always do. Fear is the weapon, not blade, not poison. Fear will kill him long before we reach him." Ghost Fang's approach was different, almost philosophical. He didn't rely on speed or brute strength. He relied on the shadows themselves, manipulating the mind of his prey until they were too paralyzed to fight back. He was a master of psychological warfare, and his reputation was the most fearsome of all. The three shadows gathered at the edge of the trial grounds, their glowing eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. Despite their differences, they shared one common goal: to prove their dominance, to remind the council why they were the deadliest assassins in Clan Eshin. "First to catch kill gets the honor." Yes, yes, Black Whisker said, his whiskers twitching. "Council will see who is best, strongest." Silent Bite smirked, though he didn't look up from his blades. "Fastest wins. You can sniff track all you like, Black Whisker, but you won't catch him before my knives do." Ghost Fang tilted his head, his eerie eyes fixed on the distant tunnels. "Your blades and your sense mean nothing. This Krix rat will destroy himself, yes, yes. I will wait, and when he falls, I will strike clean." The tension between them was palpable, each assassin eager to prove themselves not just to the council but to each other. Their rivalry was as much a part of the trial as my survival. To them, I wasn't just prey. I was a stage for their deadly performance, a canvas for their art of death. The gong rang out again, echoing through the tunnels. It was their signal. The hunt had begun. Silent Bite was the first to vanish into the shadows, his form blending seamlessly with the darkness. His movements were quick and silent, leaving no trace behind. Black Whisker followed moments later, his nose to the ground as he picked up my trail. Ghost Fang lingered for a moment, his pale eyes staring into the depths of the tunnels as though he could already see me there. Then, without a sound, he disappeared. Far ahead, I felt a chill run down my spine. The shadows seemed to shift around me, growing darker and heavier. They were coming. Each step I took, each breath I drew brought them closer. I knew their names, their reputations, their methods. And I knew that if I was going to survive, I had to outthink them, outmaneuver them, and outlast them. They were the masters of the hunt. But I wasn't just prey. I was a survivor, and I would prove it. Chapter 5. A Spark of Betrayal. The tunnels twisted and turned endlessly, the cold stone walls seeming to mock me with their unchanging monotony. My breath came in shallow gasps as I pressed onward, one paw gripping the hilt of my dagger while the other braced against the slick, uneven surface of the warrant. I had no idea how far I had run since the gong had sounded, marking the beginning of my trial, but my legs ached, and my tail dragged behind me like dead weight. Then I saw it, a faint glimmer of light ahead flickering like a dying flame. I hesitated, pressing myself against the wall, my ears straining for any sound. It wasn't the pale, sickly glow of warpstone lamps, but something different. A warm, orange light, almost comforting. But nothing in the hollow veins was comforting. Cautiously, I crept forward, each step as silent as I could manage. The light grew brighter, illuminating a small alcove tucked into the side of the tunnel. There, beneath the flickering light of a crude lantern, lay a stash of supplies. My eyes widened at the sight, bandages, water skins, and even a bundle of throwing knives gleaming faintly in the orange glow. They were arranged with care, almost reverently, as though placed there by some benevolent spirit. But there were no benevolent spirits in Clan Eshin. I crouched at the edge of the alcove, scanning the area for traps. It was too convenient, too perfect to be real. Supplies like this didn't just appear in the middle of the hollow veins. They were left here, likely by a previous trial initiate who hadn't made it out. Or worse, they were bait. The first thing I noticed was the faint glint of wire near the base of the lantern. My eyes followed it, tracing its path to a jagged shard of warpstone embedded in the wall. A crude mechanism had been set up. If the supplies were moved, the wire would pull the shard free, triggering some kind of explosive reaction. It was clever, in a crude sort of way, and deadly. Still, I couldn't afford to leave empty-handed. I needed those supplies if I was going to survive the shadows. Carefully, I reached for one of the throwing knives, my claws trembling as I avoided the tripwire. The moment my paw touched the hilt, a low growl rumbled through the tunnel, freezing me in place. The sound was deep, guttural, and close. Slowly, I turned my head, my heart pounding in my chest. From the shadows at the far end of the alcove, a massive figure lumbered into view. It was a rat ogre, but not like any I had seen before. Its body was grotesquely mutated, its skin stretched taut over bulging muscles and warped bones. One of its arms ended in a grotesque, clawed appendage, while the other was a twisted amalgamation of flesh and metal. Its eyes glowed with a sickly green light, and its breath came in ragged snarls. I cursed under my breath. The beast had been left here as a guardian, perhaps by the same initiate who had set the trap. Or maybe it was a cruel trick by the masters, another obstacle in an already impossible trial. Either way, it was clear I wasn't getting those supplies without a fight. The rat ogre's gaze locked onto me, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. For a moment it seemed confused, as though trying to decide whether I was prey or intruder. Then it roared, the sound reverberating through the tunnels like thunder. I didn't wait to find out its answer. The alcove erupted into chaos as the rat ogre lunged, its massive claws swiping through the air where I had been a moment before. I rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the blow, and scrambled to my feet. The beast's movements were fast, far faster than its bulk should have allowed, and I realized I couldn't fight it, not now. My mind raced as I darted into the tunnel, the rat ogre's heavy footsteps shaking the ground behind me. The creature's size worked against it in the narrow passage, forcing it to hunch over as it pursued me. But it didn't slow. If anything, its rage seemed to drive it faster. I reached a fork in the tunnel and veered to the right, hoping to lose the beast in the twisting passages. The walls here were jagged, the floor uneven, and I stumbled more than once as I ran. The rat ogre's snarls grew louder, closer, and I knew it wouldn't be long before it caught me. Then I saw my chance. Ahead, the tunnel narrowed even further, becoming little more than a crawl space. The rat ogre wouldn't be able to follow me there. Not easily, at least. Without hesitation, I dove into the narrow passage, scraping my fur against the rough stone as I forced my way through. Behind me, the rat ogre roared in frustration. I heard the sound of its claws scraping against the tunnel walls as it tried to squeeze into the passage, but its bulk was too great. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe, the sound of my ragged breaths mixing with the creature's furious growls. I emerged into another chamber, my body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. The tunnel was silent again, the rat ogre unable to follow me any further. But I knew it wouldn't give up. It would find another way, another path to reach me. That was the way of things in the hollow veins. There was always another way. As I leaned against the wall, catching my breath, my mind raced with thoughts of betrayal. The supplies, the trap, the rat ogre, it had all been a setup, a cruel game meant to test my cunning and my will to survive. I had survived, but just barely. The shadows were still out there, watching, waiting, and now they would know exactly where I was. I gripped my dagger tightly, my claws digging into the hilt. If this trial was meant to break me, it would have to try harder. I was still alive, and as long as I drew breath, I would fight. The shadows would find me, but I would be ready. The darkness was my enemy, but it was also my weapon. Chapter 6. The First Encounter. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint drip of water and the scuttle of vermin in the distance. My paws moved carefully over the uneven ground, claws scraping lightly against the stone as I crept through the winding tunnel. The rat ogre was behind me now, its roars fading into the depths, but I knew the real hunt was just beginning. The shadows were close. I could feel it in the chill that ran down my spine, in the way the darkness seemed heavier, more oppressive. They wouldn't rush to strike. That wasn't their way. They would wait, watching, stalking, letting fear do their work for them. I had to stay ahead of them, but every step I took brought with it the chance of disaster. I rounded a corner and froze. There, in the faint glow of a distant warpstone lamp, a figure moved. Silent Bite. I recognized him immediately, the way his black fur blended seamlessly with the shadows, the twin daggers gleaming faintly in his claws. He moved with eerie precision, his steps making no sound as he scanned the tunnel ahead. My heart pounded as I pressed myself against the wall, my body hidden in the narrow shadow of an overhanging rock. I barely dared to breathe, my mind racing. Silent Bite was hunting me, but he didn't know I was here yet. If I made even the smallest sound, it would be over. His blades were quick, deadly, and I had no illusions about my chances in a direct fight. He paused, his head tilting slightly as if listening. My muscles tensed, my claws gripping the hilt of my dagger. I had to think, had to act before he found me. The tunnel was narrow, offering few places to hide or escape. If I stayed here, he would find me eventually. Carefully, I glanced around, my eyes searching for anything I could use. A loose rock, small but heavy, lay at my feet. Slowly, I crouched, wrapping my claws around it and holding it close. If I could distract him, draw him away from my path, I might have a chance. I flung the rock down the tunnel, aiming for a distant alcove. The sound of it clattering against the stone was louder than I expected, echoing through the passage. Silent Bite's ears twitched, and he turned sharply toward the noise, his daggers held at the ready. For a moment he stood still, his body taut like a coiled spring. Then, without a sound, he moved toward the source of the noise, his movements fluid and deliberate. I waited, holding my breath until he disappeared around the corner. Only then did I exhale, my chest heaving as I tried to steady myself. I slipped further into the tunnel, moving as quickly and quietly as I could. My heart was still racing, the adrenaline coursing through me, making every sound seem amplified. But Silent Bite wasn't done with me yet. I knew that much. As I crept forward, I became aware of another sound, the faint scuff of claws against stone. It was coming from ahead, not behind. My stomach twisted as realization hit me. He had doubled back, cutting off my escape. A flash of movement to my right sent me diving into an adjacent passage. The blade struck where I had been standing a heartbeat before, embedding itself in the wall with a sharp thunk. Silent Bite didn't hesitate, lunging after me with his second dagger flashing in the dim light. I ducked, the blade slicing the air above my head as I scrambled backward. My paw found a loose rock, and I flung it at him, forcing him to step back. It was enough to give me a moment's reprieve, and I took it, darting deeper into the tunnel. The chase was relentless, a deadly game of cat and mouse through the twisting passages of the hollow veins. Silent Bite was faster, more experienced, but I had one advantage, my desperation. I used the terrain to my advantage, slipping through narrow gaps and climbing over jagged rocks that slowed him down. Each time he got close, I found a way to evade him, to force him to hesitate just long enough for me to escape. At one point, I led him into a dead-end chamber filled with pools of stagnant water. As he approached, I slipped into one of the pools, holding my breath as I submerged myself completely. The water was freezing, its foul stench filling my nose as I hid beneath the surface. Silent Bite entered the chamber, his daggers glinting as he moved cautiously. He circled the room, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of me. I stayed perfectly still, my lungs burning as I fought the urge to surface. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he turned and left, his footsteps fading into the distance. I emerged from the water, gasping for air, my body trembling from the cold and the strain. I had evaded him, for now, but I knew it wouldn't last. Silent Bite wouldn't give up. None of them would. This was a game to them, a test of their skill and cunning. To me, it was life or death. As I pressed onward, deeper into the tunnels, I couldn't help but feel a spark of pride. I had outmaneuvered one of the shadows, even if only temporarily. It wasn't luck that had saved me. It was my resourcefulness, my ability to adapt. For the first time since the trial began, I felt a glimmer of hope. If I could survive Silent Bite, perhaps I could survive the others as well. But hope was a dangerous thing in the hollow veins. The hunt was far from over, and the shadows were still out there, waiting, watching. I had won this round, but the game was only just beginning. Chapter 7. Hidden Allies. The tunnels of the hollow veins seemed endless, each passage blurring into the next. My paws ached from the constant movement, and my stomach churned with hunger. It had been hours since my encounter with Silent Bite, but the weight of his presence still lingered like a shadow pressing against my back. I kept moving, though my limbs begged for rest. To stop was to die. As I entered another chamber, the air grew thicker, heavy with the stench of rot and decay. My nose wrinkled at the smell, but I pressed on, my eyes scanning the dim light for signs of danger. That's when I saw it, movement in the corner of the chamber. I froze, gripping my dagger tightly. A figure stepped into the faint glow of a warpstone, shard lodged in the wall. At first I thought it was one of the shadows, but the sight that met my eyes was something else entirely. The Skaven before me was hunched and gaunt, their fur matted with filth and patchy in places. Their eyes glinted with a strange mixture of cunning and madness, darting between me and the tunnel behind me. They wore scraps of leather and cloth, pieced together into a makeshift garment, and carried a crude spear fashioned from a jagged shard of metal tied to a wooden shaft. Another one, yes, yes? The Skaven rasped, their voice rough as though unused for a long time. Fresh new rat thing running, yes? I hesitated, my grip tightening on my dagger. This Skaven wasn't one of the shadows, but that didn't make them any less dangerous. The hollow veins bred survivors, and survivors were desperate. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice low and cautious. The Skaven cackled softly, a dry sound like leaves scraping against stone. "Who am I?" Who, no one, nothing. Just a shadow rat like you, yes, yes. Failed, forgotten. Their head tilted, one ear twitching as they regarded me. But not dead. Oh, no, not dead. Failed, I repeated, keeping my distance. They nodded, a toothy grin spreading across their face. Failed the trial. Yes, yes, many much seasons ago. It was not fast enough, not clever enough. The shadows came, oh yes, but I was gone. Slipped through cracks, hid in dark places. Still here, yes, but they forgot. All forgot. My eyes narrowed. It wasn't unheard of for initiates to survive a failed trial, but it was rare. The shadows didn't leave loose ends. If this Skaven had managed to evade them for years, they must have been clever indeed. The Skaven's grin faded as they leaned closer, their eyes glinting with suspicion. "But what of you?" "You run too. Yes, yes. Run from them?" I nodded slowly. The trial of shadows. "Aha," they hissed, stepping back and raising their spear defensively. "You bring them here. Yes, yes. The hunters, the killers. Do not want welcome them." "No," I said quickly, raising a paw to show I meant no harm. "I've kept moving. They're not here, yet." The other Skaven relaxed slightly, though their grip on the spear didn't loosen. They studied me for a long moment, their gaze flicking to the dagger in my paw, and the mark burned into my shoulder. Then, with a begrudging nod, they gestured for me to follow. They led me to a hidden alcove tucked behind a crumbled section of wall. It was small, barely more than a hollowed-out nook, but it was dry and surprisingly well stocked. Small piles of scavenged supplies, moldy bread, chipped tools, and what looked like the remains of a crude alchemical kit were arranged with care. "Safe here," they said, sitting cross-legged on the floor. "For now, yes, yes. The shadows do not come here. No, no, they hunt elsewhere." I sat across from them, my body finally relaxing for the first time in hours. "How have you survived?" I asked, my voice laced with curiosity. "The shadows don't stop." "They do not care," the Skaven said with a shrug. "Failed once, so they forget. They hunt new prey, yes, yes, leave old rats to rot. But I do not rot. No, no, I scavenge, I hide, I watch." Their words made sense, though they sent a chill down my spine. If I failed, would I become like them? A ghost in the hollow veins, eking out a miserable existence on scraps and shadows. We shared what little food they had, a stale chunk of bread and a flask of water that tasted faintly of rust. It wasn't much, but it was enough to dull the gnawing ache in my stomach. As we ate, they spoke in hushed tones, sharing their knowledge of the hollow veins. They knew the tunnels well, pointing out hidden paths and danger zones where the walls were unstable or traps had been laid. They told me of a narrow passage that led to a deeper section of the warren, a place where even the shadows rarely ventured. "Go there, yes, yes," they said, their eyes gleaming. "The hunters will not follow, no, no. Too dangerous even for them." "And you?" I asked. "Why don't you go there?" They cackled again, shaking their head. "No, no, too late for me. Have place here, safe enough. But you still run, still fight. Must go. The thought of leaving this strange alley behind made my fur bristle. They were half mad, yes, but they had survived where others had failed. They were proof that there was more than one way to beat the trial, even if it wasn't the way I wanted. As I gathered my things and prepared to move on, they leaned closer, their voice dropping to a whisper. "Beware care, yes, yes. The shadows do not just hunt with claws and blades. They hunt with fear. They want you to break, yes, yes, to fall into despair. Do not let them." Their words stayed with me as I slipped back into the tunnels, their hidden alcove disappearing behind me. The shadows were still out there, and the hunt was far from over. But now, I had something I hadn't had before, a glimmer of hope, a path forward. I would survive. I would succeed. I had to. Chapter 8. Ambush in the Dark. The tunnels felt different now. The heavy, suffocating silence that had pressed on me earlier was replaced by something else, something alive. It was subtle at first, a faint scuttle of claws, the echo of footsteps that didn't belong to me. The air felt colder, and every shadow seemed to stretch just a little too far. I should have trusted my instincts. I should have known. I crouched low in the narrow passage, my dagger held tight in my paw. Ahead of me, the other initiate, the scavenger I'd met in the alcove, crept forward, their crude spear clutched tightly. Their movements were erratic, their tail flicking nervously. "Are you certain this path is safe?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, yes," they replied, their tone too eager, too insistent. "This way, yes. Leads to deeper tunnels, where the hunters do not go. Safe, safe." But their words didn't match their body language. They avoided my gaze, their whiskers twitching with agitation. Something was wrong. We entered a larger chamber, the walls jagged and uneven, the floor littered with debris. The warped stone glow was dim here, casting long, shifting shadows that seemed to writhe like living things. My ears twitched as I heard it, a faint sound, barely more than a breath. A scrape of claws against stone. "Wait," I said, holding up a paw. The scavenger froze, but not in fear. Their movements were deliberate, rehearsed. My heart sank as I realized too late what was happening. From the shadows, Silent Bite emerged, his black fur blending almost seamlessly with the darkness. His twin daggers gleamed faintly in the dim light, their edges wickedly sharp. He moved with predatory grace, his eyes fixed on me. "Ah, clever smart rat," Silent Bite said, his voice low and mocking. "But not clever enough, no enough. Your friend here brings you to me, yes, yes. A fine deal. I turned to the scavenger, betrayal burning in my chest. They wouldn't meet my gaze, their claws gripping their spear tightly. They promised. The scavenger stammered, their voice trembling. If I give you to them, they let me live. Let me stay. Silent Bite laughed, a harsh, grating sound that sent a chill down my spine. Promises, yes, yes, but not to you, fool rat. Only to the shadowbound. I didn't have time to argue or plead. Silent Bite lunged, his dagger slicing through the air with deadly precision. I barely managed to dodge, the blades grazing my arm and leaving a shallow cut that burned with pain. Adrenaline surged through me as I scrambled backward, my paws slipping on the uneven ground. Silent Bite moved like a wraith, his steps silent, his strikes relentless. I blocked one attack with my dagger, the force of the impact numbing my paw, but he was faster, stronger, more skilled. I had to think, to act, or I would die here. The scavengers stood frozen, their spear raised but useless. They had betrayed me, but now they realized the mistake they'd made. Silent Bite wouldn't spare them. He wasn't here to negotiate, he was here to kill. I used their hesitation to my advantage. As Silent Bite lunged again, I ducked low, grabbing a jagged rock from the ground and hurling it at his face. He flinched just for a moment, but it was enough. I bolted toward the edge of the chamber, my injured arm throbbing with pain. Behind me, I heard the scavenger scream. Silent Bite had turned his attention to them, his daggers flashing in the dim light. I didn't look back. Their fate was sealed, and I couldn't save them. The tunnel ahead was narrow, the walls closing in as I sprinted forward. My breath came in ragged gasps, my vision blurring from the effort. I could hear Silent Bite behind me, his footsteps eerily quiet, his pursuit relentless. My injured arm slowed me, the pain sapping my strength. Blood dripped from the cut, leaving a trail I couldn't hide. I knew he would follow it, knew he would catch me eventually. I stumbled into another chamber, this one filled with crumbling stone pillars and pools of stagnant water. Desperation drove me as I searched for a way out, a place to hide. My eyes landed on a narrow gap between two collapsed pillars. It was tight, almost too tight, but it was my only chance. I squeezed into the gap, my claws scraping against the stone as I forced my way through. Behind me, Silent Bite entered the chamber, his daggers held at the ready. "Run, run, little rat," he hissed, his voice dripping with malice. "You cannot hide. Shadows always find you." I held my breath, my body pressed against the cold stone. Silent Bite moved through the chamber slowly, his eyes scanning the shadows, his ears twitching at every sound. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears, each beat a deafening drum. Finally, he moved on, his form disappearing into another tunnel. I didn't move until the sound of his footsteps faded completely. Only then did I collapse against the stone, my body trembling with exhaustion and pain. The lesson was clear now. Trust was a weakness, a crack in the armor that could shatter everything. The scavenger had betrayed me, and I had nearly paid the ultimate price. But I wasn't broken, not yet. I would remember this pain, this betrayal, and I would use it. The shadows wouldn't find me so easy next time. I pulled myself to my feet, clutching my wounded arm. The trial wasn't over, and neither was I. If I was going to survive, I would have to embrace the darkness, to become just as ruthless as the hunters who pursued me. The shadows were no longer my enemy. They were my only ally. Chapter 9. Poisoned Blade. The tunnel opened into a cavernous chamber, its air thick with the acrid stench of chemicals and decay. I coughed, pulling my cloak tighter around my snout to muffle the smell. The faint green glow of warpstone illuminated the scene before me. A derelict alchemical workshop, abandoned but not forgotten. Broken flasks and shattered jars littered the ground, their contents staining the stone with vibrant hues. The walls were lined with rusting shelves, some still holding dusty vials and decaying tools. This place was a relic of some long-dead Skaven artisan. Perhaps they had been an experimenter for Clan Scryer, or maybe one of Clan Pestilence plague crafters. It didn't matter now. What mattered was that it was here, and I could use it. I moved cautiously, scanning the area for traps or signs of recent activity. The shadows wouldn't ignore a place like this if they knew of its existence, but the layer of dust and cobwebs suggested I was the first to stumble upon it in a long time. Still, I didn't lower my guard. On one of the tables, I found a collection of crude weapons, shards of metal fashioned into jagged blades, their edges coated with a dark, sticky substance. Poison. The sight sent a shiver down my spine. The concoctions here were dangerous, unpredictable, but that made them perfect for my purpose. I didn't have the brute strength to fight the shadows directly, but with the tools in this workshop, I could turn the odds in my favor. If I couldn't beat them head-on, I would outthink them. I set to work, carefully sifting through the vials and jars for anything I could use. Many of the containers were cracked or empty, their contents long since evaporated. But some still held their secrets, liquids that shimmered with an unnatural glow, powders that fizzed when exposed to the damp air. I found a half-full jar of what I guessed was warp oil, a highly volatile substance used in alchemical experiments. Next to it was a pouch of dried roots that crumbled into fine powder at my touch. They smelled bitter, sharp, and potentially toxic. Perfect. On another table, I found a set of darts, their tips rusted but serviceable. I dipped them into a mixture of the warp oil and powdered roots, the concoction hissing as it coated the metal. The result was a crude but effective poison. A single scratch would be enough to paralyze, if not kill. The work was slow, my paws trembling as I handled the fragile vials and tools. One misstep could mean disaster. At one point, a jar slipped from my claws, shattering on the ground and releasing a foul-smelling vapor. I scrambled away, holding my breath until the fumes dissipated. The dangers here were as much my enemy as the shadows. When the darts were ready, I turned my attention to the environment. The chamber itself was a death trap waiting to happen. I studied the layout, noting the narrow pathways between the tables, the piles of debris that could be toppled to block or funnel movement. If I could lure one of the shadows here, I could control the fight. Using a length of frayed rope I found in a corner, I rigged a simple tripwire across the entrance to the chamber. If triggered, it would release a cascade of broken flasks and jars, creating a cloud of noxious fumes. It wouldn't stop a determined hunter, but it would slow them down and force them to fight on my terms. As I worked, I couldn't help but reflect on the events that had brought me here. The scavenger's betrayal still burned in my mind, a reminder of the harsh lessons of the trial. Trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not here, not now. If I wanted to survive, I had to rely on myself, on my wits and my willingness to do whatever it took. The shadows were better than me in every way, stronger, faster, more experienced, but they underestimated me. They saw me as prey, a helpless rat scurrying through the dark. I would show them the error of their arrogance. When the trap was ready, I crouched in the shadows near the back of the chamber, my poison darts lined up on the table before me. My injured arm throbbed, the wound from Silent Bite's blade still raw and painful, but I forced myself to focus. Pain was nothing compared to the stakes of this game. The hours dragged on, the silence broken only by the occasional drip of liquid from a cracked pipe. Every creak of the stone, every flicker of the warpstone glow, set my nerves on edge. They would come. It was only a matter of time. Finally, I heard it, the faint, almost imperceptible sound of claws against stone. My heart raced as I crouched lower, my grip tightening on one of the darts. The tripwire was set, the trap primed. All I needed to do was wait. A figure stepped into the entrance of the chamber, their forms silhouetted against the faint light. Silent Bite, his black fur blended with the darkness, his twin daggers held at the ready. He moved with the grace of a predator, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. "Clever, smart," he muttered, his voice dripping with mockery. "But not clever enough, no. I smell fear, you little rat." His paw brushed the tripwire, and the trap sprung to life. Flasks and jars crashed to the ground, releasing a billowing cloud of toxic vapor. Silent Bite hissed, stepping back as the fumes engulfed him. I didn't wait to see if the trap had worked. I hurled one of the poisoned darts toward him, the weapon cutting through the air with a faint whistle. The dart struck his shoulder, and he staggered, one paw clutching at the wound. His movements slowed, the poison taking hold, but he wasn't done yet. His eyes burned with rage as he lunged toward me, his daggers flashing in the dim light. I ducked under a strike, grabbing another dart and jabbing it into his side. He snarled, his strength faltering as the poison overwhelmed him. With a final, ragged breath, he collapsed to the ground, his body twitching before going still. I didn't waste time celebrating. The other shadows would know something had happened, and they would come for me. I grabbed what supplies I could carry, more darts, a few vials of poison, and slipped back into the tunnels. The trap had worked, but I knew the fight was far from over. Silent Bite was only one of 3, and the others would be even more dangerous now that they knew I wasn't an easy target. I moved quickly, my mind already planning my next move. I wasn't just running anymore. I was hunting. Chapter 10. The first kill. The air was colder in this part of the tunnels, the shadows longer and darker than before. My paws were steady as I crouched behind a pile of rubble, the remnants of a long collapsed tunnel. The faint glow of warpstone nearby illuminated the jagged walls, casting eerie reflections off the poison darts I'd laid carefully by my side. I was no longer the hunted. Not entirely. The derelict workshop had given me the tools to fight back, and Silent Bite's supplies had given me a chance. I wasn't faster, stronger, or more skilled than the shadows, but I had something they didn't expect: desperation and cunning. Tonight, one of them would die. I'd chosen the ambush site carefully, a narrow passage where the walls were uneven and the floor littered with debris. The space was tight, forcing anyone who entered to move slowly and carefully. I had arranged it so that the faint glow of a warpstone shard drew attention to a small pile of supplies. A decoy designed to look like a desperate attempt to abandon weight and flee. Black Whisker would be the one to follow. Silent Bite's death wouldn't go unnoticed, and I knew Black Whisker would be eager to avenge him. He was the tracker, the one who could sniff out a trail no matter how faint. My scent trail led here, carefully reinforced with scraps of Silent Bite's fur to make it unmistakable. All I had to do was wait. The sound came first, soft, deliberate steps, accompanied by the faint scraping of claws against stone. My ears twitched as I pressed myself further into the shadows, my heart pounding in my chest. Black Whisker was close. A low hiss echoed through the passage as he appeared, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. His fur was mottled gray, his snout twitching as he sniffed the air. A cruel grin spread across his face as he crouched over the decoy supplies, his tail flicking behind him. "Foolish rat," he muttered, his voice laced with contempt. "Thinks they can run. Yes, yes. But Black Whisker always finds. I waited, my claws gripping the poisoned dart in my paw. He was close, too close to miss. But I couldn't strike yet. Not until he was vulnerable. Black Whisker leaned closer to the decoy, his snout nearly touching the supplies as he inspected them. I saw the moment his posture shifted, his body tensing as he realized something was wrong. But it was too late. I hurled the dart, the poisoned tip striking him just below his shoulder. He let out a snarl, his paw instinctively going to the wound as he staggered back. I didn't wait for him to recover. I darted out of my hiding place, grabbing a second dart and lunging toward him. He moved faster than I expected, his claws slashing through the air as he turned to face me. The tips of his claws grazed my arm, leaving shallow cuts that stung like fire, but I didn't stop. I drove the second dart into his chest, the poison spreading quickly through his veins. Black Whisker stumbled, his movements becoming sluggish as the poison took hold. He fell to one knee, his breath coming in ragged gasps. I circled him, my dagger held tightly in my paw, my body trembling with adrenaline. "You clever rat," he hissed, his voice weak but filled with malice. "But you will die too, yes, yes." His words cut deeper than his claws. This wasn't just survival anymore, it was murder. I had set the trap, lured him here, and killed him. It had been deliberate, calculated, ruthless. I stepped closer, my dagger raised, and ended it with a single swift strike. His body slumped to the ground, lifeless. The silence that followed was deafening, the weight of what I had done pressing down on me like a stone. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at his body. This was different from evading traps or setting up defenses. This was personal. I had taken a life, and not just any life, a shadow, one of the elite assassins of Clan Eshin. The blade in my paw felt heavier now, the blood on its edge glinting in the warpstone light. I forced myself to move, to take what I could from Black Whisker's body. His tools were crude but effective. A set of sharpened claws fitted over his fingers, a pouch of alchemical powders that stung my nose when I opened it, and a map with faint markings that seemed to show the paths he had tracked through the tunnels. I took everything, even the claws, though they made my stomach churn to hold. His weapons, his supplies, they were mine now, but the price I had paid for them was steep. As I left the chamber, my steps were slower, heavier. The weight of what I had done hung over me like a shroud. I told myself it was necessary, that Black Whisker would have killed me without hesitation, that the trial demanded sacrifices. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was changing, becoming something darker, something colder. The shadows weren't just hunting me. I was becoming one of them. The thought both terrified and thrilled me. I moved deeper into the tunnels, my body aching, my mind restless. The trial wasn't over, and Ghostfang was still out there. But as I clutched the stolen weapons and supplies, I realized something. I wasn't the same Krix who had entered the hollow veins. I was a killer now, a predator, and I would do whatever it took to survive. Chapter 11. The Forgotten Chamber. The tunnels sloped downward, the air growing colder and heavier with each step. My claws scraped against the stone as I navigated the uneven path, the dim warpstone glow barely enough to guide me. This section of the hollow veins felt older, forgotten, as though even the shadows had abandoned it. I should have turned back. Every instinct screamed that this place was wrong, but I had no choice. Ghostfang was still out there, somewhere in the darkness, and the only way to survive was forward. The passage ended abruptly, opening into a cavernous chamber that stole my breath. The air here was different, thick with the scent of ancient dust, and something else, something metallic, like blood left to dry for centuries. Warpstone shards jutted from the walls, casting an eerie green light that illuminated the space. At the center of the chamber stood an altar, its surface carved with runes that pulsed faintly as though alive. Surrounding it were the remnants of an ancient Skaven clan, shattered weapons, rusting armor, and crumbling banners bearing a sigil I didn't recognize. This place wasn't just forgotten, it was forbidden. I stepped cautiously into the chamber, my eyes darting to every corner, every shadow. The walls were etched with depictions of rats, larger than life, their forms twisted and monstrous. Some held weapons, others clutched glowing orbs that radiated power even in the crude carvings. As I approached the altar, the whispers began. They were faint at first, like the distant murmur of water dripping in the tunnels. But as I drew closer, they grew louder and more insistent, filling my mind with promises. Power, strength, vengeance. I froze, my claws tightening on the hilt of my dagger. The whispers weren't coming from the room, they were inside my head, slithering through my thoughts like venom. I forced myself to focus, to block out the voices. My gaze fell on the altar, where a small object lay half buried in the dust. It was a blade, unlike any I'd ever seen. Its edge shimmered with an unnatural light, and the handle was wrapped in a dark, sinewy material that seemed to pulse faintly, like a heartbeat. The whispers grew louder as I reached for it, promising me everything I lacked. Take it, wield it, become more than shadow. My paw hovered over the blade, trembling. Every part of me wanted to grasp it, to claim the power it offered. With this weapon, I could destroy the shadows, crush my enemies, and rise above the filth of the Under-Empire. But deep down, I knew the truth. Nothing in this place was a gift. The carvings on the wall seemed to shift, the monstrous rats staring down at me with glowing eyes. The whispers turned to laughter, cruel and mocking. I pulled my paw back, stepping away from the altar. The air grew colder, the room darker, as though the chamber itself was angry at my refusal. No, I hissed through clenched teeth. I won't be your pawn. The laughter stopped, replaced by a deafening silence that pressed against my ears. The warpstone shards on the walls dimmed, their glow flickering as though struggling to stay alight. I backed away, my heart pounding. The whispers tried one last time, their tone desperate, pleading. "Don't leave, take it. You'll die without it." I turned and ran. The tunnel behind me felt endless, the shadows clawing at my back, as though trying to pull me into the chamber. The whispers faded with each step, but their memory lingered, gnawing at my mind. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I realized my paws were trembling. The power the chamber had offered was intoxicating, but the cost would have been far greater. Whatever that blade was, it wasn't meant for me, or for anyone. As I sat in the darkness, the gravity of what I'd encountered began to sink in. That chamber wasn't part of the trial. It was something older, something even Clan Eshin didn't fully understand, and I had walked away from it. For the first time in the trial, I felt something other than fear or desperation. I felt resolve. The power I needed wasn't in cursed relics or ancient whispers. It was in me, in my will to survive, to adapt, to fight. The shadows would come for me again, and I would be ready. But I would face them as myself, not as a puppet of whatever dark forces lurked in that chamber. I wiped the dust from my paws and moved on, leaving the forgotten chamber behind. Chapter 12. The Second Shadow. The air in the tunnels felt heavier now, the silence more oppressive. I knew Ghost Fang was out there, waiting. He wasn't like Silent Bite or Black Whisker. He wouldn't rely on brute strength or relentless tracking. No, Ghost Fang was different. He hunted with the mind, with fear. And I could feel his presence in the way the shadows seemed to shift and dance around me, in the way every sound echoed just a little too loudly. He was toying with me. I pressed my back against the cold stone wall, my dagger clutched tightly in my paw. The narrow passage ahead opened into a small chamber where faint light trickled in from a warpstone shard embedded in the ceiling. It cast an eerie green glow, making every rock and crack in the wall seem alive. This was where I would make my stand. Ghost Fang had been watching me, studying me, but I had been doing the same. He was patient, calculating, but that was his weakness too. He believed himself untouchable, his methods infallible. I would use that arrogance against him. I moved quickly, arranging the room to suit my needs. Loose stones were piled near the entrance, ready to topple and create a diversion. A narrow crevice near the far wall would be my hiding place, my vantage point. And most importantly, the poison darts I'd prepared were hidden in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment. Once everything was in place, I settled into the crevice, my breathing shallow as I waited. The minutes dragged on, each one stretching into an eternity. I forced myself to stay calm, to focus. This was a game of patience now, and I couldn't afford to lose. The sound of claws against stone broke the silence. My ears twitched as the faint echo reached me. He was coming. Ghost Fang stepped into the chamber with a grace that made my fur bristle. His pale fur shimmered faintly in the warpstone light, and his eyes, glowing in unnatural white, swept the room with an intensity that made me shrink further into the shadows. He carried no visible weapon, but that didn't make him any less dangerous. Ghost Fang didn't need blades. His mind was his weapon. "Krix," he said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. It echoed unnaturally, bouncing off the walls in a way that made it seem as though he was speaking from everywhere at once. "You are clever, yes, but not clever enough. You are afraid, yes. I feel it, taste it." I stayed silent, my claws gripping the edge of the crevice. He was trying to draw me out, to unnerve me, but I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Ghost Fang moved further into the chamber, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the room. "Hiding, are you?" he hissed, his voice turning sharp. Good. I like it when they hide. Makes the kill sweeter." He stopped near the pile of loose stones I'd arranged, his tail flicking lazily behind him. I watched as his gaze lingered on the floor, his whiskers twitching. He was suspicious, but he didn't see the trap, not yet. I waited, my breath held as he crouched to inspect the pile. His paw brushed against one of the stones, and the entire pile toppled, sending a cascade of rocks tumbling to the ground. The sound was deafening in the small chamber, and for a moment, Ghost Fang's focus shifted. That was my chance. I sprang from the crevice, a poisoned dart clutched in my paw. Ghostfang turned, his eyes widening slightly as I lunged at him. But he was faster than I anticipated. He dodged to the side, the dart missing its mark and clattering to the ground. "You think to strike me? Yes, yes," he hissed, his voice filled with amusement. "Foolish rat, you cannot outwit the shadows." He lashed out with a clawed paw, and I barely managed to duck under the strike. My heart raced as I scrambled backward, grabbing another dart from the shadows. Ghostfang advanced, his movement slow and deliberate, like a predator savoring the hunt. "You are desperate," he continued, his tone mocking. "I see it. Yes, yes. You are afraid. But I am the fear." His words sent a chill down my spine, but I forced myself to focus. He was close now, too confident, too sure of his victory. I feigned to stumble, my paw reaching for the ground as though to steady myself. He took the bait, lunging forward with a triumphant snarl. But instead of retreating, I surged upward, driving the poisoned dart into his side. His eyes widened in shock as he staggered back, one paw clutching at the wound. "No," he hissed, his voice trembling as the poison took hold. No. I didn't let him recover. Grabbing the nearest loose stone, I brought it down on his head with all the strength I could muster. He crumpled to the ground, his body twitching once before going still. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the lifeless form of Ghostfang. The chamber was silent now, the oppressive weight of his presence gone. The reality of what I had done hit me like a blow. Ghostfang had been more than a hunter, he had been a symbol of everything I feared, everything I was trying to overcome, and I had killed him. My paws trembled as I searched his body, taking what supplies I could. A pouch of strange powders, a small vial of liquid that smelled of nightmares, and a crude map with marks I couldn't decipher. As I slipped back into the tunnels, my mind was a storm of emotions. I had defeated the second shadow, but the cost was heavy. Each kill changed me, stripping away pieces of who I had been, leaving something colder, harder in its place. The trial wasn't over, and the final shadow was still out there. But now I was ready. For the first time, I felt something other than fear. I felt power. Chapter 13. The Council's Eyes. The shadows of the tunnels had always felt alive, but today they held more than predators and prey. Unseen eyes followed me, their gaze heavy and scrutinizing. I couldn't see them, but I could feel them, the Council, watching from their hidden perches, whispering in the dark. My every step, every breath, every decision was under their judgment. High above the hollow veins, concealed behind walls of blackened stone, the Council of Clan Eshin sat in a series of narrow alcoves. From their vantage points, they observed the trial, their beady eyes gleaming in the dim glow of warped stone screens. Each screen displayed a fragment of the labyrinth below, its image flickering with faint static as their devices captured my movements. At the center of the gathering, Master Skral leaned forward, his claws tapping rhythmically against the stone ledge. "This Krix rat, interesting. Yes, he rasped, his scarred ear twitching. Survives longer than most. Cunning, smart, resourceful." Another master, a wiry Skaven with silver-streaked fur, hissed softly in disagreement. "Resourceful perhaps, but reckless stupid. 2 shadows dead. This disrupts balance. The trial is no longer proper." "Proper?" Skral sneered, baring his teeth. "There is no proper in the dark, no. This is survival. Krix adapts, uses mind, not just claw. That is what we want." A third council member, her voice calm and sharp as a blade, interjected. "But at what cost? Ghostfang and Black Whisker were not weak, no. Their deaths speak of failure, of our own judgment. Did we choose poorly for this trial?" The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the warpstone screens. "No," Skral growled. "The shadows underestimated Krix. Yes. That is their failure. Krix uses traps, poisons, clever tools. This is Eshin way." Another master, hunched and jittery, leaned forward. "But this trial is flawed, broken. We see it. The hollow veins shift change. Ghostfang's death leaves a vacuum. Yes, and now Krix's supplies stolen tools. The trial tilts, becomes unfair." "Unfair?" Skral barked, his claws slamming against the ledge. "Unfair is the Under Empire. Unfair is the council's judgment. Krix is doing what others cannot. The shadows are hunters, but they forget the prey can bite. The masters erupted into a cacophony of whispers and hisses, their voices overlapping in heated debate. Intervene we must. Balance must be restored. No. Let the trial run its course. Disgrace to the shadows, this is. No assassin should fall to an initiate. Perhaps the shadows grow weak. This trial reveals truth. Amid the chaos, a figure stepped forward, a gray seer, draped in robes adorned with symbols of the great horned rat. His presence silenced the room instantly, his pale eyes sweeping across the gathered council. Enough, the seer said, his voice soft but commanding. The trial proceeds, yes. No intervention. Let the shadows decide fate destiny. The horned rat watches, and he will judge. Skral grinned, his sharp teeth glinting in the warpstone light. See. The horned rat favors survival, not balance. Let Krix prove strength, or fall fail. The council murmured in uneasy agreement, though tension lingered in the air. The screens flickered again, showing my movements as I navigated the labyrinth. I paused in one frame, crouched low as I inspected a trap I had dismantled. The gray seer's eyes narrowed. This Krix, interesting, yes. But watch closely. The final shadow remains. Ghost Fang and Black Whisker were hunters, but the last is death itself. Back in the tunnels, I could still feel their eyes on me, their judgment hanging over my every move. The whispers of the council echoed in the darkness, though I couldn't hear their words. I imagined their debates, their arguments, and wondered what they saw when they looked at me. Or was I a promising candidate? A failure waiting to happen? Or just another pawn in their endless games? I shook the thoughts away. It didn't matter. Their opinions didn't matter. The trial wasn't about them. It was about survival. And if they wanted to watch, then they could watch me succeed. The council's eyes stayed on me as I moved deeper into the hollow veins, their whispers fading into the dark. But I couldn't shake the feeling that their judgment wasn't the only one that mattered. Somewhere, in the deepest shadows, the horned rat watched too. Chapter 14. Through the Ashen Veins. The air was wrong here, thick and heavy with the acrid scent of sulfur. Every breath burned, my lungs clawing at the foul mix of heat and ash that filled the ancient tunnels. This was no ordinary passage of the hollow veins. It was something far worse. The walls around me were scorched black, streaked with veins of red that pulsed faintly like molten arteries. A faint glow emanated from cracks in the floor, where thin streams of volcanic gas hissed upward. I could feel the heat rising through the stone, making the air shimmer and distort like a mirage. My fur was slick with sweat, and every step was a battle against the oppressive heat. This was the Ashen Veins, a cursed section of the trial that even the shadows avoided. But I didn't have a choice. Ghost Fang's death had left the tunnels behind me unsafe, and the only way forward was through the fire. I moved carefully, each step measured to avoid the cracks and fissures that marred the ground. The air was thick with shimmering waves of heat, distorting the tunnel ahead. My vision blurred as I pushed forward, my claws scraping against the walls to steady myself. A hiss erupted nearby, and I froze. One of the cracks burst open, spewing a plume of noxious gas that stung my eyes and throat. I staggered back, coughing violently as I tried to cover my snout. The gas burned like fire, and my vision swam with dark spots. When the eruption subsided, I forced myself to keep moving. I couldn't stop. The Ashen Veins wouldn't kill me quickly, but they would kill me. As I navigated deeper, the heat began to play tricks on my mind. The shadows along the walls seemed to shift and writhe, forming shapes that shouldn't exist. Faces flickered in the dark, their eyes glowing like embers. "Krix, why run?" The voice came from nowhere and everywhere, echoing through the tunnels like a cruel whisper. I turned sharply, my dagger in hand, but there was nothing behind me. The heat had begun to claw at my mind, twisting my thoughts into something alien. The whispers grew louder as I pressed on, merging with the hiss of the gas, and the crackle of the molten veins beneath my feet. "You are weak. Yes, yes, the trial breaks you." "No," I growled through clenched teeth, forcing the words out as I pushed forward. "I'm still here. I'm still alive." The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, its floor littered with jagged rocks and glowing pools of molten stone. The air here was suffocating, each breath a struggle. My legs trembled as I moved forward, my body screaming for rest. But rest would mean death. As I stepped closer to one of the pools, the whispers returned, louder this time. They sounded like the council, their voices sharp and mocking. "Krix will fail, just like the others." "No," I muttered, shaking my head. "I won't. I'm stronger than them." The faces in the shadows seemed to laugh, their forms flickering and shifting like firelight. My claws scraped against the wall as I steadied myself, trying to block out the visions. I focused on the ground ahead, forcing one step after another. The hallucinations grew worse as I moved deeper. At one point I thought I saw Silent Bite standing ahead of me, his daggers glinting in the glow of the molten pools. He grinned, his eyes burning like warpstone embers. "Dead, dead," I whispered, my voice shaking. "You're dead. I killed you." The vision laughed, its form twisting and warping until it dissolved into the shadows. My chest heaved as I staggered forward, my mind fighting to separate reality from illusion. The worst came when I reached a narrow ledge that overlooked a chasm of molten stone. The heat rising from below was unbearable, my fur singed from the waves of heat. The ledge was barely wide enough to walk on, and one misstep would send me plunging into the fire below. My legs trembled as I stepped onto the ledge, my claws gripping the stone for balance. The whispers returned, louder than ever, taunting me with every step. "Krix, why continue? You will fail, like all before you." "No," I hissed through gritted teeth, forcing my body to move. "I'll survive. I'll win." The ledge crumbled beneath my paw, sending a spray of loose stone into the chasm below. My heart leapt into my throat as I pressed myself against the wall, my claws digging into the stone to keep from falling. "Not like this," I muttered, my breath ragged. "Not here." I forced myself to keep going, each step more agonizing than the last. My vision blurred, the molten glow below merging with the flickering shadows around me. My body ached, my lungs burned, but I didn't stop. When I finally reached the other side, I collapsed onto the cool stone floor, gasping for air. The whispers had faded, replaced by the distant hiss of gas and the faint crackle of molten veins. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, my body trembling as I fought to regain my strength. The ashen veins had tested me in every way, physically, mentally, and emotionally, but I had survived. As I pulled myself to my feet, my legs still unsteady, I realized something. The trial wasn't just about outwitting the shadows or surviving the traps. It was about endurance. The council wanted to see how far I could be pushed before I broke. I wiped the sweat from my brow and stepped forward, leaving the ashen veins behind. I wasn't broken yet. I was still alive. And that was enough. Chapter 15. The Final Shadow. The tunnels were silent now, an unnatural stillness that pressed against my ears like a heavy weight. The oppressive heat of the ashen veins had faded, replaced by a cold, biting air that made my fur stand on end. Each step echoed louder than it should have, the sound bouncing back at me from every direction. It wasn't the echoes of the stone I feared. It was the silence that followed. Ghostfang was gone. Silent Bite and Black Whisker too. That left only one. The last shadow. The one they called Nightfang. Nightfang wasn't like the others. Where Silent Bite struck fast and Black Whisker tracked relentlessly, Nightfang was a master of misdirection. Whispers among the initiates called him the Unseen Death, the one who could slip into the deepest shadow and disappear. He didn't hunt like the others. He played. And now he was playing with me. I crouched low in a narrow tunnel, my breathing shallow. The faint glow of warpstone barely lit the path ahead, casting long, flickering shadows. I had doubled back several times, crossing my own trail to confuse him, but it hadn't worked. The last shadow was too clever. No matter how many twists and turns I took, the sense of being watched never left me. Clever. Yes, A voice hissed from the darkness, sending a shiver down my spine. But not clever enough. I froze, my dagger clutched tightly in my paw. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. A whisper that seemed to echo in my very thoughts. You killed the others. Yes, yes. But they were weak, stupid. I am not like them. The sound of claws scraping stone echoed behind me. I spun, my heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Show yourself, I snarled, my voice trembling with more anger than confidence. A faint chuckle answered me, low and mocking. No, no, little rat, you show me. The tunnels opened into a large chamber, its floor littered with debris. The air was cold here, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and made you doubt your own strength. I stepped cautiously into the room, my eyes scanning every shadow. Do you feel it? Yes, yes? Nightfang's voice taunted, drifting through the chamber. The fear. It creeps, it grows. Soon it will break you. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to focus. The chamber was wide but cluttered, with jagged pillars and piles of rubble that cast long, twisting shadows. This wasn't just a place, it was a battlefield, and Nightfang had chosen it carefully. I moved slowly, my steps silent, as I studied the room. The pillars could be used for cover, the rubble for traps. The faint flicker of warpstone in the corners made the shadows dance, masking movements. If Nightfang wanted to play, I would play. But it would be on my terms. I crouched behind a pillar, my breathing steady as I reached into the pouch at my side. My fingers closed around one of the poisoned darts I had taken from Black Whisker. It was crude, but it would do. The sound of claws scraping stone came again, closer this time. I tensed, my ears straining to pinpoint the direction. A shadow flickered to my left, but when I turned, it was gone. Lost already, little rat, Nightfang's voice whispered, now directly behind me. I spun, slashing with my dagger, but the blade met only air. A claw raked across my shoulder, sending me stumbling forward. I bit back a cry of pain, my paw pressing against the wound as I turned to face the empty space behind me. You are slow, Nightfang said, his voice filled with mockery. Weak. Do you think you can survive? No, no. I forced myself to breathe, to focus. Nightfang was toying with me, trying to push me into a mistake. But I wasn't the same Krix who had entered the hollow veins. I had learned. I had adapted. I moved to another pillar, keeping low, and quickly set one of the darts against a small pile of loose rubble. The faint shimmer of the poisoned tip was barely visible in the dim light, but it was enough. I positioned myself a few steps away, my dagger held ready. Come out, I shouted, my voice echoing through the chamber. Or are you afraid of me? The chamber fell silent. Then came the laugh, low and cold. Afraid? No, no, I am the fear. A flicker of movement appeared at the edge of my vision. Nightfang emerged from the shadows, his fur blending seamlessly with the darkness. His eyes glowed faintly, the only thing betraying his presence. You will die here. Yes, yes, he said, his voice dripping with confidence. And I will take your place. He lunged, his claws slicing through the air. I dove to the side, rolling over the rubble pile and grabbing another dart as I came to my feet. Nightfang turned, his movements fluid and predatory, and advanced again. I backed away, leading him toward the trap I had set. My heart pounded as I waited for the right moment. He leapt, his claws outstretched, and I dropped to the ground, rolling to the side as his momentum carried him forward. His paw struck the pile of rubble, dislodging the poisoned dart. The tip pierced his arm, and he stumbled back with a hiss. His movements became sluggish as the poison spread, his eyes narrowing as he realized what had happened. Clever, clever, he growled, his voice filled with rage. But not enough. I didn't wait for him to recover. I lunged forward, driving my dagger into his side. He let out a snarl of pain, his claws raking at me weakly as his strength faded. I pulled the blade free and struck again, this time at his throat. Nightfang crumpled to the ground, his body twitching before going still. The chamber was silent once more, save for the sound of my ragged breathing. I stared at the lifeless form of the last shadow, my chest heaving with exhaustion, and adrenaline. It was over. The trial wasn't finished yet, but the shadows were gone. I had outthought, outlasted, and outmaneuvered them all. But as I sat there, staring into the darkness, I couldn't help but wonder what I had become. The Krix who entered the hollow veins would have fled from Nightfang, terrified and helpless. The Krix who left this chamber was something else entirely. I wasn't prey anymore. I wasn't even just a survivor. I was a shadow. Chapter 16. Rise of the Hunter. The chamber was still. Nightfang's lifeless body lay at my feet, his once graceful form now crumpled and broken. My chest heaved as I struggled to catch my breath, my claws slick with blood, his and mine. The poisoned dart had done its work, but the cost had been high. My side burned where his claws had raked deep into my flesh during our final exchange. Blood seeped through the ragged tears in my fur, dripping onto the cold stone floor. Each breath sent a fresh wave of pain coursing through me, but I was still alive, and he wasn't. I crouched over Nightfang's body, my paw trembling as I reached for the small, obsidian pendant that hung from his neck. It was a simple thing. A shard of polished stone carved with jagged runes. Every shadow carried something unique, a personal symbol of their power. This would be his legacy now, a trophy. My trophy. I tore the pendant free, holding it up to the faint light of the chamber. The obsidian gleamed in the dim warpstone glow, its edges sharp enough to cut. It felt heavy in my paw, like a piece of the shadow's arrogance had transferred into it. One more, I rasped, my voice hoarse. One more step to the end. My mind drifted back to Silent Bite and Black Whisker, the first two shadows who had fallen. Their trophies hung at my side now, tied to my belt with scraps of fabric. From Silent Bite, I had taken one of his twin daggers, a sleek, black blade that whispered against the air with every swing. The dagger had saved my life more than once in this trial, its edge sharp enough to pierce through even the toughest defenses. From Black Whisker, I'd taken his alchemical pouch, a collection of powders and poisons that still smelled faintly of the fumes he had crafted. The pouch was small but weighty, its contents deadly. I had used it sparingly, but each time it had turned the odds in my favor. Now, with Nightfang's pendant added to the collection, my belt felt heavier than ever, a tangible reminder of the lives I had taken. I slumped against the nearest pillar, my vision blurring as exhaustion threatened to overtake me. My body was a patchwork of wounds and bruises, each one a testament to the trial's brutal toll. The wound on my side bled freely, the edges ragged and raw. I knew I needed to treat it, but the effort of moving felt insurmountable. But I couldn't rest. Not here. The shadows were dead, but the trial wasn't over. The council's eyes were still on me, judging my every move. If I faltered now, they would see it as weakness, and I couldn't afford that. Gritting my teeth, I forced myself to stand. The room spun for a moment, the edges of my vision darkening, but I steadied myself against the pillar. I fumbled with Black Whisker's pouch, pulling out a small vial of bitter-smelling liquid. I poured it over the wound on my side, biting down on my cloak to muffle the scream that tore from my throat. The liquid burned like fire, searing the edges of the wound as it stemmed the bleeding. When the worst of the pain subsided, I tied a strip of cloth around my torso, tightening it as much as I could. It wasn't much, but it would keep me moving. I took one last look at Nightfang's body before turning away. The chamber felt emptier now, the oppressive weight of his presence gone. The shadows were all dead, their trophies hanging at my side, but I didn't feel victorious. The trial had changed me, piece by piece, stripping away the rat I had been when I entered. The trophies weren't just reminders of my triumphs, they were reminders of what I had sacrificed to survive. I stepped back into the tunnel, each step heavy but determined. The pain in my side throbbed with every movement, but I refused to let it slow me down. This was my trial, and I would finish it. The shadows around me felt different now, less like enemies and more like allies. I had killed the hunters, claimed their strength, and proven that I could adapt. I wasn't prey anymore. I wasn't even just a survivor. I was a hunter. And the council would see what I had become. Chapter 17. The betrayal of the mark. The air shifted as I emerged from the tunnels, the oppressive darkness of the hollow veins giving way to a faint, sickly glow from the surface warpstone lamps. My body ached with every movement, the deep gash in my side throbbing in time with my heartbeat. The trophies of the shadows clinked softly at my belt as I took my first steps into the upper warrens. I had done it. The shadows were dead. I had survived. But as I staggered forward, my head high despite the pain, the weight of unseen eyes pressed down on me. It wasn't the council this time. These eyes were different, hungry, envious. The shadows shifted, and I froze. The first attack came from my left, the whistle of a blade slicing through the air, barely giving me enough time to react. I spun, Silent Bite's dagger flashing as I deflected the strike, the force sending a sharp jolt up my arm. 3 figures stepped into the dim light, their faces half hidden beneath crude hoods. Other initiates. Their eyes burned with the desperation and ambition I had seen so many times before. One of them grinned, his teeth glinting in the light. Krix returns, yes, yes. The victor. But too strong, powerful to live, no, no. Another hissed, raising a crude spear. Must kill, kill. Take trophies, take glory. Council will see us, yes, yes. My heart sank. They didn't care about the trial, about what I had endured. To them, I was nothing more than an obstacle, a stepping stone on their path to survival. I tightened my grip on the dagger. If they wanted a fight, I would give them one. The first one lunged, his blade arcing toward my chest. I sidestepped, twisting my body to avoid the blow, and countered with a quick slash across his arm. He yelped, stumbling back, but the others were already closing in. The one with the spear thrust forward, aiming for my wounded side. Pain flared as I twisted away, the spearhead grazing my ribs but missing its mark. I drove my dagger upward, catching the spear's shaft and wrenching it from his grasp. He snarled, claws raking toward my face, but I ducked and brought my knee up into his stomach. He crumpled, gasping for air, but the third initiate was already upon me. This one fought with a jagged, rusted blade, his movements erratic but fast. He feinted left, then right, his strikes forcing me to give ground. My back hit the wall, and for a moment panic threatened to overtake me. But I wasn't the same Krix who had entered the trial. I had faced the shadows and lived. These rats were nothing compared to them. I waited for his next strike, watching the way his shoulders tensed, the way his grip shifted on the hilt of his blade. When he lunged, I sidestepped, bringing my dagger up in a sharp arc. The blade caught his wrist, and his weapon clattered to the ground. Before he could recover, I slammed the pommel of the dagger into his head, sending him sprawling. The first 2 initiates recovered quickly, their eyes burning with renewed fury. They circled me, their movements cautious now. I could see the doubt flickering in their expressions, the realization that I wasn't an easy target. You think you can take me? I snarled, my voice cold and sharp. I killed the shadows. You are nothing. The words were a gamble, a bluff meant to shake their confidence. And it worked. The one with the spear hesitated, his claws twitching nervously. The third, however, snarled and charged again. I met his attack head-on, my dagger flashing as our blades clashed. His movements were wild, driven by desperation, but I stayed calm, using his aggression against him. I stepped inside his guard, twisting his arm and driving the dagger into his side. He gasped, his eyes wide with shock, before collapsing to the ground. The remaining 2 froze, their eyes darting between me and their fallen comrade. The spear wielder took a step back, his tail lashing nervously. This is your chance, I said, my voice low and deadly. Run or die. For a moment they hesitated. Then the spear wielder turned and fled, his companion close behind. Their footsteps echoed in the tunnels, growing fainter with each passing second. I stood there, my chest heaving, as the silence returned. Blood dripped from my dagger, pooling on the ground beside the fallen initiate. I knelt, my paws trembling as I searched his body. He carried little, a crude blade, a handful of supplies, but I took them anyway. Each piece of equipment was another chance at survival. As I stood, the weight of what had just happened settled over me. They had been initiates like me. They had faced the same trials, endured the same suffering, and I had killed them. But they had made their choice, just as I had made mine. In the hollow veins, there was no room for mercy. I adjusted the trophies on my belt, the weight of them grounding me. The shadows were gone, and now the other initiates knew what I was capable of. The surface loomed ahead, the faint light of the council's chamber glowing in the distance. I wasn't the same rat who had entered the trial. I had fought, bled, and killed to get here. If the council wanted proof of my worth, they would have it. And if anyone else dared to stand in my way, they would fall. Chapter 18. The Silent Ascent. The climb was slow, each step a labor as my battered body protested every movement. Blood matted my fur, and the gash in my side burned with every shallow breath. The weight of the trophies on my belt seemed heavier than ever. More than just symbols of victory, they were burdens of the choices I had made to survive. The tunnel ahead sloped upward, the faint glow of warpstone lamps marking the path toward the surface, toward the council. I had emerged from the hollow veins, but I wasn't the same rat who had entered. The shadows had taken their toll, stripping away pieces of me with each kill, each betrayal. Now I carried their echoes in every scar, in every step. The council chamber loomed before me, the oppressive weight of its vaulted stone walls pressing down as I staggered through the entrance. The dim glow of warpstone illuminated the gathered masters, their eyes gleaming like predatory stars in the dark. They sat in a semicircle, their faces obscured by hoods, their whispers a low hum that filled the chamber. Master Skrull stood at the center, his scarred form leaning forward as his gaze fixed on me. His expression was unreadable, his whiskers twitching faintly. "Krix," he rasped, his voice cutting through the whispers like a blade. "You return. Alive, yes, but changed." I dropped to one knee, my strength nearly failing as I bowed my head. My paw clutched the belt at my side, the trophies clinking softly as I held them up. Silent Bite's dagger, Black Whisker's pouch, Nightfang's pendant. 3 shadows dead, I said, my voice hoarse but steady. I faced them. I killed them. The trial is done. The council erupted into whispers, their voices sharp and hissing. Some spoke with approval, others with doubt. 3 shadows dead? Impossible. Strong, yes, but reckless stupid. Survived what others could not. Worthy, maybe. Skrull raised a claw, silencing them. His eyes narrowed as he regarded me, his tail flicking behind him. You defy odds, Krix. Shadows were strong. But you stronger, yes? I survived, I replied, meeting his gaze. That is all that matters. The gray seer stepped forward then, his robed figure towering over the other masters. His pale eyes gleamed as they swept over me, his snout twitching with faint amusement. The horned rat watches, the seer said, his voice calm and deliberate. He sees your survival, your cunning cleverness. But what cost price have you paid? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. The price of survival was written across my body, in every wound and every scar. It was in the weight of the trophies at my side and the ghosts of the shadows that lingered in my mind. I am alive, I said finally, my voice steady. The cost is worth it. The seer nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on me for a moment longer before turning to the council. Then let the council judge. Is Krix worthy of the shadows, or no? The masters exchanged glances, their whispers swelling once more. After what felt like an eternity, Skrull stepped forward, his claws clicking against the stone floor. Krix, he said, his voice firm, you have faced the hollow veins, killed the hunters, returned alive. Few survive, fewer thrive. You have earned your place, yes. He raised his paw, pointing at me with a sharp claw. You are Shadowblade now, no longer prey rat. You are hunter, you are shadow. The words struck like a blow, the weight of them settling over me. Shadowblade. The title I had fought, bled, and killed for. The recognition of my survival, of my worth. But the victory felt hollow. The memories of Silent Bite, Black Whisker, and Nightfang lingered, their faces flashing in my mind. They weren't just obstacles, I had become like them. A killer, a predator. The council rose as one, their voices echoing through the chamber. Shadowblade Krix, rise, rise. I forced myself to my feet, the pain in my side flaring with the effort. My eyes swept over the gathered masters, their faces still hidden, their approval faint but present. The gray seer stepped closer, his pale eyes narrowing. Go now, Shadowblade. Rest heal. But remember, no, the shadows are never safe. Never still. As I left the chamber, the weight of my new title settled over me. Shadowblade. I had earned it, but at what cost? The hollow veins had taken everything, my innocence, my trust, my sense of self. But they had also given me something. Strength, purpose, survival. I emerged into the pale, flickering light of the surface, the shadow of the council's chamber fading behind me. I was Shadowblade Krix now. A hunter. A survivor. And in the eyes of Clan Eshin, that was all that mattered. Chapter 19. The Whispered Oath. The chamber was colder than I expected, the air heavy with the scent of burning warpstone and damp stone. Green light flickered from braziers arranged in a tight circle, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. At the center of the circle stood a jagged altar carved from black obsidian, its surface etched with ancient Skaven runes that pulsed faintly as though alive. This was the heart of Clan Eshin's power, the place where shadows were born and sworn. I stood before the altar, my body aching from the wounds of the trial, my mind heavy with the weight of what was to come. Around me, the council loomed in the darkness, their forms barely visible beneath their hoods. Their whispers filled the chamber, a chorus of voices that seemed to crawl into my ears and burrow into my mind. Shadowblade Krix, Skral said, stepping forward. His voice cut through the whispers like a blade. You stand here not as rattling aspirant, but as hunter-killer. You have earned this place, yes, yes, through blood, pain, and shadow. I nodded, my claws tightening at my sides. The trophies of the shadows still hung at my belt, their weight a constant reminder of the cost of survival. The horned rat watches, Skral continued, gesturing to the altar. He sees all. He demands much. To serve, join Clan Eshin. You must give yourself to the shadows. Swear the oath, and become more than flesh and fur. Become shadow itself. The room seemed to darken as he spoke, the flickering green light dimming until the shadows grew thick and alive, wrapping around me like a cloak. My breath caught in my throat as I stepped forward, the obsidian altar rising before me. The gray seer approached from the other side of the circle, his robes dragging along the floor like whispers. He held a long, curved dagger in one paw, its blade gleaming with warpstone energy. His pale eyes fixed on me, unblinking. Kneel, he commanded, his voice soft but unyielding. I obeyed, my knees pressing against the cold stone floor. The altar loomed above me, the faint hum of its runes vibrating in the air. The seer held the dagger aloft, its edge catching the faint light. Do you swear a pledge to serve the shadows, to kill silence in the name of Clan Eshin, to sacrifice all for the horned rat's will? I swear, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. Do you vow promise to leave behind the weak ratling you were, to embrace the darkness and become its blade? I vow, I replied, my claws digging into the stone as the weight of the words pressed down on me. Do you accept the cost price of power, knowing that it will take all? For a moment I hesitated. The faces of the shadows flashed in my mind, their lives taken by my claws. The initiates who had turned on me, their desperation and fear. The memories of the hollow veins, the sacrifices I had made to reach this moment. I accept, I said finally, my voice unwavering. The seer lowered the dagger, its blade hovering just above my outstretched paw. Then bleed, Shadowblade. Give yourself to the shadows. I extended my paw, the tip of the dagger biting into my flesh. Pain flared as blood welled up, dark and red against the gleaming blade. The seer moved the dagger to the altar, letting the blood drip onto its surface. The runes flared brightly, their pulsing light filling the chamber. The whispers grew louder, rising to a fevered pitch as the shadows around me seemed to close in. The air felt thicker, heavier, as though the darkness itself was pressing against me. Skrell stepped forward, his claws resting on my shoulder. "You are Shadow now. Yes, yes," he said, his voice low and reverent. "You belong to Clan Eshin, to the Horned Rat's will. Your life is no longer yours, no. It is ours, his." The weight of his words settled over me like a shroud. The oath wasn't just a promise, it was a binding. My survival, my victories, my very existence now belonged to the shadows. The whispers faded, replaced by silence so deep it seemed to swallow the air itself. The seer raised the dagger again, tracing the tip along the runes of the altar. The light dimmed once more, the chamber plunging into near darkness. "Rise, Shadowblade Krix," Skrell said, his voice cutting through the silence. I stood, my legs trembling beneath me. The council watched from the shadows, their eyes gleaming with approval and something darker. "You are no longer prey. No, Skrell continued. You are predator. You are blade. You are shadow." As I stepped back from the altar, the weight of the oath settled deep within me. I had given myself to Clan Eshin, to the shadows, to the Horned Rat's will. There was no turning back now. I adjusted the trophies at my belt, their weight a reminder of what I had sacrificed to stand here. The path ahead was steep, filled with more blood, more sacrifice, but it was mine. The shadows welcomed me as one of their own, and I would wield them without hesitation. I was Shadowblade Krix now, a servant of the dark, a killer bound by whispers and blood, and the darkness would never let me go. Chapter 20. A Shadow Risen. The council chamber was silent, save for the faint crackle of the warpstone brazier at its center. I stood at attention, my wounds bandaged but still aching, my mind sharp despite the weight of exhaustion. The mark of my oath burned on my palm, a constant reminder of the price I had paid to reach this moment. I was no longer Krix the Initiate. I was Shadowblade Krix, and today I would prove it. Master Skrell's gaze was sharp as he stepped forward, his scarred visage illuminated by the sickly green glow. He held a roll of parchment in one clawed paw, the edges stained with soot and blood. His tail flicked behind him as he unfurled the scroll, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Your first contract," he rasped, his voice carrying a weight that settled heavily in the chamber. "A mark to hunt, to kill." He turned the parchment toward me, revealing a crude sketch of a Skaven with sharp, angular features and a wiry frame. The mark's name was scrawled beneath it in jagged script: Betrayal, traitor thief. Skrell's whiskers twitched as he continued. "Betrayal was once one of us, yes, but he betrayed the clan, stole secrets. Now he hides, runs, thinking himself safe. You will find him. Silence him." The council's eyes burned into me from the shadows, their approval and expectations palpable. This was my first test as a Shadowblade, a chance to prove that I was more than just a survivor. "I will not fail," I said, my voice calm but resolute. Skrell's grin widened, his teeth glinting in the light. Good. Go now, Shadowblade. Prove yourself. Show that the shadows obey you." I left the chamber without a word, the parchment clutched tightly in my paw. The details of the contract were burned into my mind. Betrayal was hiding in an abandoned section of the Under Empire, a warren of collapsed tunnels and forgotten chambers. It was a place few dared to tread, filled with dangers both natural and unnatural. But I wasn't afraid. The hollow veins had taught me to embrace the darkness, to use it as a weapon. Betrayal would learn the price of his betrayal, and the clan would see the truth of my strength. The tunnels ahead were dark and treacherous, the air thick with the scent of rotten mildew. My movements were silent as I slipped through the shadows, my claws gripping the hilt of Silent Bite's dagger. The weight of the trophies at my belt reminded me of what I had overcome, of the lives I had taken to stand here. Each step brought me closer to my mark, my senses sharp as I navigated the twisting passages. I felt the pull of the shadows around me, their embrace no longer suffocating but empowering. I was one of them now, a part of the darkness. I found Betrayal huddled in a small chamber, his back turned to the entrance. He was muttering to himself, his claws scratching at a piece of parchment spread across a makeshift table. The faint glow of a warpstone shard illuminated his wiry form, casting his shadow long and jagged against the wall. He didn't notice me as I stepped silently into the room, my dagger glinting faintly in the dim light. My heart was steady, my breathing calm. This was no different from the shadows I had faced in the trial. Wrecktail was prey, and I was the predator. I struck swiftly, my blade slicing through the air with deadly precision. Wrecktail gasped as the dagger pierced his back, his claws fumbling for a weapon that wasn't there. He crumpled to the ground, his breath ragged as he tried to speak. "Why?" he rasped, his voice weak. "Why kill me?" "Betrayal," I said coldly, stepping closer. "The shadows do not forget." With a final twist of the blade, I ended his life. The room fell silent, the only sound the faint crackle of the warpstone shard on the table. I knelt beside his body, retrieving a small pouch tied to his belt. Inside were scraps of parchment, sketches of Eshin symbols, and what looked like crude diagrams of the council's chambers. Secrets stolen from the clan, just as Skral had said. I placed the pouch at my belt alongside the trophies of the shadows, the weight of it a grim but satisfying reminder of my purpose. As I left the chamber, the shadows seemed to welcome me, their embrace no longer a threat but a promise. I had completed my first contract, taken my first step as a shadow blade. But as I disappeared into the darkness, the weight of what I had become lingered. The hollow veins had forged me into a weapon, but each strike came with a cost. I wasn't the same Krix who had entered the trial, and I never would be again. I was Shadowblade Krix, a servant of the shadows, a blade in the hands of Clan Eshin. And the shadows always demanded more.